Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Pre-TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and updated into modern audio standards. This particular story is called It Matters, written by _sky__. Life is extremely abundant in the universe. Even primitive civilizations quickly realize that much. However, unlike many others, humans knew nothing about it until they developed wormhole generators, enabling them faster than light travel. For some reason, which remains hotly debated topic among scientific circles even to this day, their solar system had only one single life-bearing planet, their home planet, obviously. Shockingly, other planetary bodies in their system didn't even have simple microbial life, let alone complex flora and fauna. Not even their gas giants, which are usually notoriously famous for hosting a stupendous variety of viruses and bacteria. Now, naturally, some readers might find this to be a cruel coincidence. That happened in only this one rather unusual solar system and wonder why mankind's telescopes did not manage to detect life in some of the other neighboring systems. After all, any species capable of generating wormholes must also be able to build more than adequate sensory equipment, which could reveal traces of life even on planets hundreds of light years away. For this, I must first commend my readers for their rational thinking and logical reasoning. Secondly, I also have to ask them to be open-minded about what I'm to utter next. For, believe it or not, in diameter of roughly 1,200 light-years around the human solar system, there is not a single life-bearing planet, moon, comet present. Due to such circumstances, humans were only able to witness or study one instance of life, their own carbon-based chemistry, making it practically impossible for them to know how to detect a multitude of other types of life. Not to mention other, more exotic forms of technically carbon-based life, which used inefficient nanite fusion reactors to fuel themselves, not the chemical energy of burning oxygen like Earth animals. Due to such isolation, humans are one of the few species to develop FTL technology by themselves, and the only known civilization to do so before cracking the theory of abiogenesis. What natural phenomena had put humans in such a lonely position is still open up for debate, as I previously stated. At the moment, the leading theory is that a series of cascading supernovas, events where one giant supernova affects the other large neighboring stars to also go supernova in just a few thousand years, completely sterilizing the affected area of space, giving it no time to recover. It is assumed that Earth was spared due to the planet being coincidentally protected by its parent star at exact time of every occurring supernova explosion. Unlikely, but statistically still possible. Despite the fact that not a single event of cascading supernovas has yet to be witnessed or recorded, it is assumed such events were only plausible in time of the early galaxy, and even then, exceedingly rare. Just for comparison purposes, it is estimated that out of more than 1 billion barren lifeless planets in our galaxy, more than 99.3% are located in human space, which speaks volumes about unusual situation this civilization found itself in. In my own investigation, I conclude this lifeless isolation was likely a driving factor behind the now infamous First Contact Wars between the Terran Union, official name of the human civilization, and the Krizzle Hive, which obviously needs no introduction. It is hard for us to understand the whole worldview of beings such as humans, but it is well established that for extended periods of time they seriously considered a theory which exerted that they were likely the only intelligent species in the galaxy. This obviously inaccurate assumption only shows the desperate state and severe lack of rudimentary data which emanated through their entirety of pre-FTL mankind. And to my readers, who find something like that ridiculous, and maybe rightfully so, I would ask them to try and put themselves in a position of the average pre-FTL human and seriously try to come up with a different conclusion, while still taking into account the mediocrity principle. For one, you literally have no proof whatsoever of life outside your own planet. And due to the fact that you're located in such a desolate place, there are no more advanced civilizations close by to visit your planet and leave behind archaeological evidence. Even those which were in their neighborhood, a few thousand light years away, had far more interesting places to visit, filled with colonizable planets, enemies to fight, their Krizzle Hive swarms to run away from. With all that explained, I would like to return to the topic of the First Contact Wars, and take a highly unpopular stance regarding it. While most blame the humans for the start of the war, and often get extremely emotional when considering its wide consequences, I, for one, find their actions more than rational, taking into account they did not know the side effects of aggravating Krizzle Hive Nor they had a clue about the countless trillions which would die as the Crystal Hive stripped thousands upon thousands of life-bearing planets to collect resources needed to overwhelm the Terran Union. Rather ironic, when taken into account the war technically started with mankind's dreadnoughts engaging one of the Crystal swarms poised to harvest the biomass of a planet inhabited by the medieval-level civilization. You see, dear reader, those medieval primitives the Crystal aimed to harvest were the first intelligent life ever discovered by humans, supposedly intricate creatures by human standards, possessing a rather complex culture, dense spur, body composition similar to that of a human, plus substantial amounts of feline or wolf features. Unexpected familiarity and pleasant physical appearance of those primitives to the subjective human eye played a big role in their mutual interaction. Mankind had found first alien microbial life only a year prior, so you can maybe imagine their surprise upon discovering a system with 8 planets, all littered with complex life, one of which was a home to an undeveloped alien civilization. The complete shock and amazement such discovery caused inside the Terran Union was unprecedented. Unlike our civilizations, which are surrounded/molested with life and usually see other civilizations as an unavoidable nuisance, humans saw them as something more. Not just mere curiosity, but a potential way to enrich their culture. I assumed that human civilization evolving in an environment devoid of life totally alienated their way of thinking compared to our common sense. But then again, it makes some logic for them to consider it valuable something which they saw as extremely rare. We ourselves mostly learn what we must about other civilizations in case we have to engage them in some form of diplomatic exchange, ask them about the possible sightings of advanced Crystal swarms, etc. While large numbers of humans want nothing more than to explore everything about them, their customs, and any form of art they may possess, though they certainly did not share those same feelings when it came to the Crystal Hive. So, when considering all of that, it'll not come to you as much of a surprise to find out mankind has studied that medieval civilization tirelessly from day one, and saw them both as an invaluable scientific discovery and a likely future member of their own Terran Union. Even naming this system Devita, what I'm told it translates to life in one of their languages, unaware that what they discovered was the norm rather than exception. However, the system Devita was also highly lacking regular life-littering neighborhood systems, so humans were still left clueless about the true nature of the universe. A few years after they already started uplifting the native technologically, then all of a sudden a small Crystal swarm opened a wormhole to the system. I say small swarm, but to mankind a few billion 11-kilometer-long harvester ships was all but small. However, in that time they had not yet witnessed terrifying grouping orders of magnitude more numerous, though it is said that humans were most shocked by the design of the Crystal harvester ships, long egg-shaped cylinders littered with spikes, and found them far from appealing. Unfamiliar with locusts of the galaxy, as the humans nicknamed them afterwards, they tried to establish contact. Expectedly, Crystal gave no reply and went on consuming/stripping one life-bearing planet after another, launching a countless spikes from their outer hull down on the surface. The spikes, which soon grown into harvesting drones or warrior forms if some apex predator proved as a potential threat, the likes of which humans have seen too many. Terran Union observed all of it and desperately employed every conceivable method of communication, unable to understand what the Crystal were doing, even self-detonating some of their own ships safe distance away to try and get their attention. Unsurprisingly to us, who understand that despite their ability to generate wormholes, Crystal are not technologically intelligent/sapient race, but are more alike to stellar bug/swarm life forms, believed to have evolved during an early stage of galactic development, likely in some system laddered with asteroid debris and dust particles, creating a form of basic atmosphere long before any planet-bound life emerged. Though in truth, the evolutionary origins of the Crystal Hive are also a highly debated topic, and far greater minds than mine have failed to find a conclusive answer to that, so I'll leave it be for now. Expectedly, mankind's attempts to enact diplomacy with Crystal failed spectacularly. With the biomass of whole life-bearing planets consumed on a weekly basis and no signs of slowing down, some information I have say that during that period of tensions, humans saved significant amounts of biological samples from those worlds, while carefully avoiding any form of conflict. This method of life preservation when faced with the Crystal swarm is very similar to the one our civilization deploy, and does show that for a certain period of time, Humans can be rational and perceptive of potential dangers. I raise this point because a story about mankind being hyper-aggressive species, which cares not for obvious perils, took too much acceptance in our community, even within some members of academia, which do not understand human stubbornness in continuing to fight against the Chrysalis hive. But to me, it is obvious that any species which could not somehow rationally or instinctively perceive possible/likely consequences of its actions would surely not be able to form a cohesive civilization, let alone build wormhole generators. So after the Chrysalis swarm had already consumed the biomass of 5 out of the 8 planets in Devita's system, the swarm closed in on the one which would home the primitive civilization. By that time, however, humans had amassed a sizable fleet in its orbit, mined the surrounding area of space, and fortified the planet in hopes that all of it would act as a strong deterrent, even going as far as to allowing biological volunteers from Terran Union to deploy on planet, next to the countless synthetic/robotic divisions which were already present there, ready to defend it. Or the knowledge that option of retreat did not exist. Only individuals which had been evacuated for some civilians belonging to said medieval civilization. To my readers, who now probably laugh at the notion of using deterrence against the Chrysalis, I would like to state that Terran Union had surprisingly sizable military tradition, despite being isolated from potential invaders from another world. Because who would be crazy enough to go into part of the space which looks like it had just been stripped clean by the biggest Chrysalis swarm ever recorded? Current records show their advancement in the AI technology were unparalleled. Their armies and fleets required no biologicals to function, yet could still be supplemented by large numbers of biological conscripts if need be, to hold the line in case of catastrophic military engagement. But for additional clarification, I would advise watching sensory recordings of the first battle, which ensued after Chrysalis ignored all of the warnings sent their way. Unlike some other civilizations which bravely tried to face the Chrysalis, the humans also had unexpected advantage of their industry being far away from life-bearing worlds, which the swarm could harvest to replenish its forces while performing the attacks in said industrial zones. I would also add that mankind had an advantage of simply having the time to significantly develop their forces, even after discovering the wormhole technology. For as my readers will undoubtedly understand by now, and know that the tragedy/conflict which unfolded at Devita was in large part due to the humans themselves opening numerous wormholes into the system, in order to send all kinds of research/civilian/military vessels there. What in turn attracted the Chrysalis swarm in the first place, as they are biological, able to detect the wormholes, and have a far easier time of opening their own wormholes in the system which has already experienced such anomaly. My own species was one of the rare few to figure out how to open wormholes by themselves, unaware that with every additional wormhole we opened inside our system, chances of Chrysalis swarm noticing us slowly increased, until the day they arrived and we were forced to flee. Some readers might claim that to be a reason I am biased in favor of humans, but those are just the types of ad hominem attacks that do not present an argument in this discussion, as I am clearly differentiating between facts and personal opinions. Though I must admit sensory data showing Chrysalis swarms getting decimated by mankind's dreadnoughts has some appeal to a member of a civilization whose home planet's biomass got consumed by them. Still, even I had a hard time believing the claims of human diplomats that their first engagements with Chrysalis swarms had been nothing but decisive victories, despite how likable such stories were to me personally. It turned out that ever since their formation of the Terran Union, mankind hadn't participated in any form of interstellar conflict, but had still conserved robust military doctrine of tactical planning where military AIs and biological individuals performed constant theoretical works and simulations related to the topic of utilizing new technologies in war-oriented applications. Likely so, if I might add. Regardless of their initial belief that they are likely the first intelligent species to arise in the galaxy, they were careful enough to consider the idea that they might be wrong. However, it was realistically impossible for them to predict, with a significant degree of certainty, type of enemy that they would be facing. And even after being aware of such statistical fact, they showed obvious bias in their analysis of potential threat, never for once assuming that they might face rapidly spreading stellar organisms. Instead, they expected enemies with similar configuration to that of their own civilization, one which uses reason, logic instead of hyper-tuned biological instincts, like the Chrysalis. You can say whatever you want about the hive's doctrine of aggressive quantity, which the swarm always seems to employ whenever facing anything akin to a conflict, but it is undeniably efficient when it comes to interstellar warfare. However, the Kurzul initial attack failed to surprise Terran Union and its military organizations. They might have never before fought, or even realistically or seriously considered facing enemy comparable to the Hive, but their artistic/fictional works regarding the topic were plentiful. I was surprised to hear that literally for centuries individuals or groups of humans wrote extensive fictional works describing a multitude of scenarios where mankind participated in military engagement versus the type of opponent which was in many ways extremely similar to that of the Kurzul Hive and its vast life-devouring swarms. Initially, such often ingenious works of military theory were disregarded as unrealistic, but were fortunately preserved amongst mankind's databanks, significantly improving tactical reaction of the AIs once the conflict finally escalated at Davita's system. Here, I will finally say a few words about the results of the initial engagements between Terran Union and the Kurzul Hive, as by now all of my readers, regardless of their species, will have enough info to reasonably clearly understand actions of both participants. Leaving aside the truth that there are few sights so scary as the Kurzul swarm, their individual ships or harvesters never presented a significant challenge to a battleship of any post-FTL civilization in a fair one-on-one fight. But as we all know, the reality is far from fair, and Kurzul Hive usually only seeks engagements if it is a comfortable numerical advantage of at least 1,000 to 1. If the swarm is not ambushed or wants to slow/hold enemy fleet until reinforcements arrive. Previously, the best historically recorded result or victory any civilization accomplished was by untranslatable noise, which were able to defeat a single swarm despite their fleet being outnumbered roughly 571 to 1. However, the species untranslatable noise is no more, and in recent times some historians tried to challenge these claims, but that is beside the point here. However, all of that was in the early days of the galaxy. As the Kurzul further evolved and adapted to any obstacle, their harvester/ships becoming ever more adequate with every engagement, perfecting themselves over billions of years of interrupted evolution. Such result was considered almost impossible to repeat, and no one was really willing to attract the wrath of the galactic apex life form anyway. After all, the evolution only favored those who would run away from it. So, when the Kurzul swarm approached the planet Terran Union previously spent months fortifying without answering to any of mankind's attempts at communication, the whole hell broke loose. The minefields. Yes, my fellow sapient readers, it was the proximity mines humans deployed in wide orbits around the planet. They were the first to go off when Kurzul harvesters simply flew into them, to the complete shock and amazement of the humans. As they were completely visible, they too clearly serve as a deterrent, rather than any kind of insurmountable obstacle, to send direct message of stay away. However, Kurzul animalistic mind likely initially only saw them as debris, not a threat. And once the Kurzul swarm was hurt/disturbed, everything spiraled out of control. True, initial explosions released a megaton's worth of energy, turning thousands of Kurzul harvesters into nothing more than a space dust. But as always, the Hive adapts, and rather quickly at that. The swarm launched/unleashed myriad of spikes from the hulls of its harvesters, obviously aiming for the now perceived danger. Most of the mines were destroyed/swept aside with crude but surprisingly effective projectile weapons. The projectiles which failed to hit a mine, however, continued moving forward directly at the Terran fleet, which now considered itself under obvious assault and opened fire. Now the Kurzul harvesters might scare you, but the mankind's dreadnoughts will do much more. Never before has any known civilization built such monstrosities of war, constructed with an idea that in any confrontation there is no substitute for quality. These 113-kilometer-long ships give a meaning to the word firepower. Their armament capable of extinguishing life from a planet in a single burst of its guns, covered in sleek frame aerodynamically shaped like a knife, ready to slaughter any enemy. Thick silver armor littered with nanites, programmable/able to repair even the most grievous/critical damage. Such armor combined with the synchronized sapient AI-guided point defense systems makes for one very sturdy ship. Even before the Kurzul's projectiles managed to reach human fleets, thousands upon thousands of harvesters were disintegrated, be it by countless lasers which swayed all over the swarm with surgical precision, or byproduct of untold other types of weaponry mankind's dreadnoughts unleashed upon them. The first engagement was intense, brief but intense, with the initial wave of Kurzul harvesters numbering in the millions swept aside by vastly superior weaponry. Only a few of mankind's dreadnoughts suffered any damage. But the Hive adapts. It always adapts. Each of their following attacks more furious, their ships rewriting their genetic code to ever-changing flow of the battle, their harvesters reforming into their battle forms, growing weapons and armor at a substantial rate. Still, it was not enough, and regardless of the swarm's numbers, humans were completely victorious that day. Our own civilizations never had the luxury of significantly experiment with wormhole technology out of fear of attracting the attention of the Grizzle Hive, but not the Terran Union. They and their AIs were able to pursue scientific advancements far beyond what we had ever contemplated. Armed with that knowledge, they developed zero-point energy reactors of absurd efficiency and used them to power their dreadnoughts, giving them an almost insurmountable edge in most of the battle scenarios. But I admit that is not an argument as to why we should ally with the humans. Few days after the Grizzle Hive swarmed the Devita system yet again, trillions of harvesters already reshaped into their warrior forms, launching both themselves and their weaponry against the wall of the mankind's war machines, overwhelming, while losses piled up on both sides. The entire system was plunged into the war, fighting slowly, spreading from planet to planet, from orbit to orbit. The chaos spread everywhere. And in the center of it all, a small light-bearing planet, a home of a civilization humanity had no obligation to defend, but still gave it all it had. Mankind's dreadnoughts and carriers constantly bombarding/harassing the swarm as it flung at them like some wild animal. It was the ultimate confrontation between biological instincts of Grizzle Hive pitted against the technological brilliance of a sapient mind. It was a duel between raging swarm of spacefaring organisms against fractal arranged formations of hyper-intelligent AIs. And somehow, even when Grizzle harvesters managed to close the distance, the fleet of the Terran Union held on. Its already severely damaged dreadnoughts launching themselves into the swarm to self-detonate, taking the countless enemies down. The dreadnoughts, being sapient themselves, mattered little. The human idea of the value of life which they were to protect was in too high regard in their minds. Finally, a few days after the ferocity of the engagement sided down, there was a dense ring of debris left circling around the parent star of Devita's system. Mankind was somehow victorious once again. But that is not an argument as to why we should ally with the humans. Humans have a saying, third time is the charm, and it was. For the Grizzle Hive, their third offensive started by constant openings of hundreds of wormholes, launching wave after wave of swarms, their doctrine of relying on quantity slowly depleting the fleet of the Terran Union. But even when faced with defeat, they did not pull back, determined not to give an inch, buying time for mankind's military AI to come up with another idea on how to fight this alien enemy, regardless of the odds. Initially, they focused on developing a type of biological weapon, as by now they had some understanding about the nature of the Grizzle Hive, like nobody had tried that before. Still, the Terran Union in that time knew nothing about history of the other civilizations. Expectedly to us, any virus or bacteria they designed stood no chance against the capability of Grizzle ships to rewrite their DNA or to simply discard the infected parts of themselves into the vacuum of space. Saying nothing about the challenges of spreading the disease among such organisms. Even weaponized nanites failed miserably. Then they turned to mass production, their industrial capacity thrown into overload. With countless and purposefully constructed drones/fighters deployed against the Hive, small ships are far easier to produce than dreadnoughts. Naturally, the Grizzle simply responded by growing their own fighter-class drones, forcing the Terrans to go for quality. In desperation, before the last remnants of the human fleet fell, the Terran Union played its irrefutable trump card, though an experimental one, sending into the fray the most advanced spaceship ever developed. Super Dreadnought, the Sun Eater, a true marvel of sapient engineering. I ask my more curious readers to forgive me here, as human diplomats did not give me specific details regarding this weapon of mass destruction, as it is a military secret. What little I was able to understand in general is that the Sun Eater is equipped with a multitude of custom-designed FTL drives, which enable it to generate the wormholes not as a means of travel, but as a weapon in an ingenious way. Opening wormholes where one end is connected to the center of a nearby star, while the other is placed at the heart of an opposing fleet. This is far harder to do than it might seem, as it requires the capability of opening three-way wormholes from a single location, combined with substantial miniaturization of wormhole generators. A true game-changer of a weapon, if ever there was one. With literally the power of the stars in its hands, there to burn opposing fleets. Once the Sun Eater entered the battle, balance of power shifted. Grizzle swarms surprised and unable to adapt their tactics quickly enough as millions of harvesters perished with every single new wormhole opened. But that is not an argument as to why we should ally with humans. What I want to speak about is what came after. Suddenly, as the Terran Union seemed to be on the verge of victory, all connections with the defeated system were lost, with no explanation as to why. No micro wormholes, which were usually used for communication, could be opened. No ships or supplies could be sent to aid in battle, and none of the Terran Union could understand why. Carelessly, they tried to open wormholes inside the Devita to support their now trapped forces. But regardless of all the power/energy they had hastily thrown to their FTL generators, no wormhole could be opened there. The reason for this is known today, but it is a strict military secret. In utter desperation, and a few hours later, they finally managed to emerge a few light months away from the system, with their ships resolved to traverse the rest of the way on sublight speeds. Expectedly, their sensors caught the light coming out of the system, and with it, the entire battle started again, playing off in front of their eyes. Everything from the first moment Grizzle entered the system, to the initial engagement, to the dreadful harvesting of planets. Mankind's fleet moved forward while seeing all too similar scenes of Grizzle swarms plunging itself into their fleets, fearful of what they might see next as they closed in ever closer, fully aware of the time that had already passed. Some dreadnoughts even seeing themselves and what they were doing before they had to retreat for critical repairs their nanite armor was not able to accomplish, or for some experimental upgrades, only to finally bear witness to, for the second time, the carnage of the Sun Eater unleashed upon the swarm. Still, nothing could prepare them for the moment when even the superweapon failed. Without any warning or explanation, all of the wormholes that held open, spewing the hot plasma of the center of the star, now collapsed, leaving the remnants of the Terran fleet to fend for themselves without constantly arriving reinforcements from the industrial powerhouse of the Terran Union. But luckily, the same was true for the Grizzle, too. When they finally reached the relative proximity of the system, everything was unexpectedly silent. No SOS signals, reinforcements requests, or tactical information was transmitted to them. It seemed again as if the humans were alone yet again, this time in a more ominous way. A few million Grizzle ships were found scattered all over the system, easily destroyed on their own, cut from the reinforcements, and with no more life-bearing planet left to replenish the numbers, they presented hardly more than practice targets. For those small victories could not in any way offset one shattering loss. The surface of the planet, which so many tried to protect, was devastated, littered with craters and obvious signs of heavy ground combat. Of the native life, there was barely anything left, microorganisms mostly. Survivors? There were none. The fighting had been so fierce. Even the traces of synthetic life forms Terrans had designed for the sole purpose of war were hard to find, let alone any remains of human volunteers or natives. They had deployed everything they had, from ordinary fragile humans to robust, hyper-intelligent nanite swarms. But it was not enough. From the native soldiers, which generations ago knew no weapon more sophisticated than a bow, to full divisions of the finest mecha warriors, it didn't matter. Fortifying continents with everything from self-replicating AI mines, orbital mass drivers, laser installations powered by zero-point reactors, to the pits filled with sharp sticks, Grizzle were too numerous. Using everything from nuclear, biological, chemical, space-ripping weapons of mass destruction to the one last bayonet charge, and that is what shook me to the core. For what I have seen there defied any reality. Some recordings have been saved, engraved into information crystals, the only thing Grizzle would not consume. Every single one of them showing the same. The last stands of small groups of survivors, fighting with what they had left, trying to somehow write down what they had learned, in hopes that it could help others win where they could not. Terran diplomats have shown me all of it, and every time I overwhelmingly saw the same thing. Not the desperation, nor the fear of death, but hope. The belief that, regardless of how grim, how suicidal the last charge or stand was, it was worth it. A single scene, in particular, had it cut deep into me, far deeper than I thought any memory possibly could. On top of a small rocky hill stood a primitive bunker on the verge of collapsing, its surroundings littered with half-blown trenches, coupled with spikes topped with fluorescent chemical poisons. Everything to hold the Grizzle war forms even for a few minutes more. Around it, the combat raged in earnest, every single combatant holding the line, no matter the blood energy required. Nowhere to retreat from here, the land upon which they stood, soon to be their grave. They all knew it, I'm sure. It took me more than I care to admit to recognize that defenders were not a single or cohesive group. I can't explain it. Somehow, in that moment, natives, humans, mecha warriors, synthetics, even the nanite swarms, they all looked alike. No, not physically, not like that. It was the way they stood, fought, and died together, what made them look like a single unit. What I saw was so much more. In front of my eyes, a human and native soldier charged from the trench, shoulder to shoulder like brothers in blood, armed with nothing but pikes tipped with fluorescent poison. In front of them, Terran synthetic warriors engaged in hand-to-hand combat, strangling two grizzled warforms. Their exoskeletons crushed by its brute strength, but their tentacles still lashing out instinctively, trying to rip him to pieces. Then, just as another grizzled warform was rushing in to overwhelm the synthetic, both human and native frantically throwing themselves in between, somehow piercing its weaker belly. Far from enough to kill, or even severely injure grizzled warform, but enough to give the synthetic plenty of time to react. Sadly, not enough to save the two of them. The grizzle they pierced, slashing them with its obsidian-like tentacles. Just a single moment before, the synthetic charged head-on into it, ripping the said tentacles with religious zeal, smashing its exoskeleton. He turned its head, only to see both of his saviors lying on the ground, their red blood flooding the small puddle under his feet. The human still seemed to be breathing, the native not so fortunate. The synthetic warrior moved closer to them, like to give the first aid, but another 5 grizzled warforms were already upon him, trying to rip his artificial body apart. He was trampled down, grabbing what was left from one of those pikes, stabbing and slashing as he could. The fluorescent poison mixing with the yellow blood of grizzles as the tentacles smashed into his synthetic body. But he was made of stone stuff, might have even emerged victorious somehow, if not for a few more grizzles swarming on him, their instincts telling them it's right time to strike. I did not see from where exactly, but heavy rifle fire from some mecha powered through the grizzle's exoskeleton not a moment too soon, enough to give the synthetic a clear edge, an edge he would not squander, even though victory did cost him a right hand. Damaged as it was, he rushed next to the lying human to check up on him, disregarding the artillery strike pounding the ground not far from them. There was a lot of dust in the air, what was probably the reason I never saw Nanite Swarm positioning itself to shield them, nor the other armed synthetics swarming up a perimeter. My attention was fully captured on that dying human, blood pouring through his mouth, but the smile never left his face as he stared at the synthetic he saved. I was neither able to understand nor hear what they were communicating with each other, the sound of surrounding battle too chaotic for me to discern. Grizzled warforms pushing hard on their position. Still, I somehow knew that what I was looking at were the lost survivors of the Terran forces, remnants of their respective divisions tied together in a final desperate defiance to the Grizzle hive. There, in front of me, was the last human in Defeater's system, drawing its ending breath, giving its life to protect the synthetic warrior, designed to die for mankind. The irony of it, not escaping me. If the humans are ready to fight, bleed, and die to protect a machine, imagine what they are ready to give up for another life. And that is, to me, the best arguments that we can have to ally the humans, because to them all, life matters. Except for the Grizzle Hive. Fuck the Grizzle Hive. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.